happens when a police officer dares to slap a black man in public without realizing that man is an FBI agent. This isn't just a case of racial profiling. It's a wake-up call for a system that's grown comfortable dismissing the truth, and a dramatic reversal that left an entire city stunned. This story isn't for those who watch and forget. It's for those who believe that justice doesn't always come from shouting but from action, courage, and the silence that strikes back at the right person, at the right time. Watch until the end, because you won't believe who ends up on their knees. There are moments when you're not punished for being wrong. You're punished because someone believes you don't have the right to be right. Atlanta, Georgia city, that blends its history of resistance with the pace of modern life, where lively neighborhoods coexist with invisible cracks in the justice system. On what seemed like an ordinary afternoon in the Buckhead suburbs, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway of an upscale residential complex. The driver, a middle-aged black man in a crisp white shirt and gray tie, wore a composed expression, though his eyes revealed a lifetime of hard-earned resilience. His name was Malik Jefferson, 52 years old. A man of quiet sophistication and measured speech, yet rarely seen for who he truly was. Not an employee, not a kicker, but a senior FBI special agent, the head of the Federal Investigation Bureau's Atlanta field office. But today, Malik wasn't here to lead a raid or brief a security task force. He was simply helping his daughter move into her new home, a modest villa tucked in a quiet community where neighbors smile in the daylight and whisper behind curtains at night. Before he could reach the back of his SUV to unload a box of books, a cold voice snapped from behind. "Hey, what are you doing here? This is a private neighborhood." Malik turned to face a young white police officer approaching, hand resting on his firearm, despite there being no threat. No questions asked, no ID requested, no assessment, just suspicion, sharp and immediate, fueled by bias. "I'm here helping my daughter move in," Malik replied calmly, carefully. "She moved here last week. This is her home." The officer hesitated for a beat, but instead of de-escalating, he doubled down, his voice taut, with ingrained reflex. "I need you to stay where you are. Show me your ID, and do not move until I verify who you are." Malik could feel the eyes from surrounding home curtains shifting slightly, silhouettes peeking. He wasn't surprised. He'd heard this story too many times. What chilled him wasn't the officer's reaction, it was knowing that even someone like him, who outranked most frontline law enforcement officers, was still vulnerable to the same suspicion. "I'm Malik Jefferson," he said evenly. "I can show you my federal badge." "I don't care about your badge," the officer cut in. "You're trespassing, and I have grounds to detain you for suspicious activity." It all unfolded in under 30 seconds, but it stretched like an indictment against an entire system. Malik felt his throat tighten, not with fear, but with quiet fury. Just then, the front door swung open. His daughter, Jasmine Jefferson, burst outside. "Dad, what's going on?" But it was too late. Before Jasmine could reach him, Malik was shoved against the SUV, his hands wrenched behind his back. The cold click of handcuffs snapped sharply in the spring air. "My father is a federal agent," Jasmine screamed. "You're arresting the wrong person. You're going to regret this." The officer froze. For a moment, his eyes locked on the federal badge, now visible on Malik's chest. Shock spread across his face like a jolt. But no one spoke. No one removed the cuffs. No apology was offered. Only one thing remained, the suffocating silence that hung like stone. And Jasmine's gaze, not one of panic, but the quiet, burning stare of someone watching justice be humiliated on her own doorstep. From that moment on, something began to crack. There are truths that need no evidence, just a look, a tone, enough to ignite a storm. That's what happened to Malik that morning. Less than 48 hours after his arrest, Malik was released temporarily with the help of a court-appointed public defender, not because the system believed he was innocent, but because they couldn't justify holding a man with no criminal record on a vague charge like suspicious behavior in a private neighborhood. But Malik knew that, when he walked out of the Atlanta Police Department, he wasn't a free man. He was just someone newly labeled. On social media, a short video of his arrest began circulating. A nearby resident had recorded the moment Malik was pinned to the hood of a police cruiser. No explanation. No justification. Just a black teenager who didn't look like he belonged in someone else's eyes. The comments beneath the video weren't entirely sympathetic. Half were enraged on Malik's behalf, but the other half loud and venomous shot back with suspicion. If he wasn't doing anything wrong, why run? Cops don't arrest people for no reason. Maybe he was planning something shady in that rich neighborhood. Malik read every comment, not out of curiosity, but in search of an answer to a question that kept haunting him. How could something so baseless ruin the reputation of someone nobody even knew? Worse still, the damage didn't stop at social media. Booker T. Washington High School, where Malik was an honor student and captain of the science club, called an emergency parent meeting. The reason? To reevaluate Malik Jefferson's participation in school-sponsored public events. Malik only found out when he received a cold message from his student advisor. You are temporarily suspended from any media-facing programs pending official review. No one clarified what official review meant. Just the shadow of doubt was enough to erase his opportunities. Things escalated further when a local reporter called not to offer support, but to verify an accusation. One of the two officers who arrested Malik had filed an internal report, claiming Malik had responded aggressively, used threatening language, and appeared to be hiding a suspicious object. No body cam footage existed. The officers hadn't activated them. And yet, somehow, that lie carried more weight than the truth Malik couldn't prove. His family was stunned. His mother, Delarisa nurse, with over 20 years of service at the local hospital, cried in silence. I used to believe that if you lived right, worked hard, they'd see you differently, she said. But they don't see, they only see skin. Malik collapsed into her arms. He didn't want her to see his pain, but that day, he couldn't hold it in any longer. That night, sitting at his desk, surrounded by medals and certificates, math awards, science honors, and a photo from his upcoming graduation, Malik knew one thing. If he stayed silent, the story would be buried, just like thousands of others hidden beneath the phrase, internally resolved. So Malik wrote, not for the press, not to sue, but to tell his truth in his voice. It was a long post, no rage, no profanity. Just the raw truth of a high school student dragged from a sidewalk, kicked off scholarship lists, and labeled a threat because of a silent camera and two uniforms who refused to see him. In just 24 hours, his post was shared over 12,000 times. His honest tone, thoughtful words, and quiet pain struck deep with people who had lived that same feeling, being looked through like you didn't exist, or worse, being seen only as a problem. CNN reached out. This time, Malik had the chance to tell his story on camera, uncut, unfiltered, and on his terms. When the interview aired, something unexpected happened. A retired senior officer in Atlanta publicly posted, "If this kid is lying, I'll hand over my Medal of Honor, but I know he's telling the truth. I've seen the truth twisted too many times." Malik's narrative began to shift. From a teenager under suspicion, he was becoming a voice for a generation, willing to speak up not with anger, but with an undeniable truth. But Malik knew the road ahead was long. And he also knew this. When you speak the truth, not everyone will want to listen, but only by standing up can you stop being treated like a shadow. Malik Jefferson knew all too well what it felt like to be treated with suspicion simply for being who he was. He had lived a full life as a black man in a country where promises of justice were plentiful, but the truth was often written by those in power. But never had he imagined that the very uniform he once respected, once served, would be turned against him like an invisible indictment. That morning in Atlanta, the air was humid, and the sky loomed gray with the threat of rain. Malik had planned a simple Aranto check on a civil dispute case at a small shop on the city's east side. No badge, no uniform, just a middle-aged black man in a light blue dress shirt, sunglasses, and a satchel filled with case files and legal documents. He had barely stepped out of his car when a sharp voice barked behind him. Hey Hands off the car, right now. 2 white police officers, young, muscular, the kind of men raised with authority, injected earlier than morality, rushed toward him as if he had just mugged someone in broad daylight. Before Malik could even identify himself, he was slammed against the hood of his own black sedan, his arm wrenched behind his back. "I'm an attorney. I have the right." Malik tried to speak, but a sharp elbow to the ribs cut his words short. One of the officers snatched his satchel and tossed it to the pavement. Files spilled out, pages caught in the wind like meaningless scraps. Like his pursuit of justice was nothing more than a pile of worthless paper. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Guys like you usually talk faster than that," one officer sneered. No one asked his name. No one asked why he was there. No one checked the federal credentials he always carried. All they saw was a black man next to a nice Karen. That was all it took to justify their actions. While being frisked, Malik caught a glimpse of himself reflected in the car window, blood trailing from his lip, jaw trembling not from pain, but from fury and fear. Fear that he'd become another headline in the evening news. Fear that no matter how calm he stayed, one wrong move could erase his name from every legal record and make it trend instead as a hashtag. "This is my car," Malik repeated, softer now, not out of weakness, but from the realization they weren't listening. Finally, a bystander recording video shouted, "He didn't do anything." Only then did the officers reluctantly pull back, though their eyes still brimmed with suspicion. Another bystander rushed over, helping Malik gather his scattered papers. "Are you okay?" the young woman asked, her voice full of concern. Malik nodded faintly, but his mind had already moved elsewhere. He looked into the lens of the phone, still filming, not to threaten, not to retaliate, but to preserve proof. This time, no one could say, "We didn't know." An hour later, at the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs office, Malik sat in a crisis meeting. He wasn't trembling, he wasn't angry. He had only one thing left: resolve. He placed a fresh, organized folder on the table. You just arrested a lawful citizen, someone guilty of no crime on the street, simply because he looked out of place, standing next to his own vehicle. The head of Internal Affairs blinked. "We need to investigate further, Mr. Jefferson." The officers reported that I was acting suspicious. "Please, define that for me. Does being brown and standing near a nice car qualify under your policy?" Silence swallowed the room. "Do you even know who I am?" Malik asked, his tone calm but sharp as a razor. "I've trained over 150 of this city's police officers. I've written speeches for the Attorney General. And this morning, I was treated like trash on the sidewalk, not because I broke a law, but because they knew no one would say anything." Someone in the room cleared their throat. "So, what are you going to do, Malik?" He stood, the usual warmth gone from his eyes. "I'm going to make sure the entire system knows that this time they didn't target someone with nothing to lose. This time, they picked the wrong one. Power reveals who we are, but it's silence that gives them permission." Malik Jefferson sat alone on an old wooden bench at Midtown Atlanta's subway station. Night had fallen. The neon lights cast a cold blue hue on the cracked tile floor, painting his face with a shade of weary determination. In his hands was a feelie, the very one that detailed what had just happened. A file in which he was the witness, the victim, and the man at the center of it all. After being wrongfully arrested by Officer Carter, Malik thought he'd only be detained for a few hours before being released. But he was wrong. He was hauled into the station, held for nearly 12 hours with no clear explanation, denied a phone call, and subjected to whispered insults behind frosted glass. Another one of those types. A young officer sneered. "Guess a fancy suit doesn't make you a real man," another added when they saw Malik's Armani blazer hanging in a corner. When he was finally released, there was no apology, no explanation, no one looked him in the eye. Just a cold printed statement. Suspicious behavior. Detained for identity verification. Malik walked out of that precinct not just exhausted but rattled to his core. After years of clawing his way up the ladder, of earning every ounce of respect, he had been given a brutal reminder. To some, His skin color was still seen as a system error, no degree or title could ever fix. What crushed him most wasn't the violence, it was the silence. No one spoke up. Not a single white colleague from the federal office where he served as one of the top strategic advisors asked what had happened. No one from the police station claimed accountability. No local media mentioned the incident, even though he had once been featured on national television as an inspiring young black entrepreneur. It was as if it never happened. But Malik knew if he remained silent, he would be complicit, just another name quietly erased from a chair he fought decades to earn. That evening, he returned home to his penthouse on the 38th floor overlooking Centennial Park. But the city lights no longer sparkled with wonder. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't text anyone. He just sat on the balcony, whiskey in hand, staring into the night with one burning question. If I don't do something, who will? And as if fate wanted to make things worse, the next morning, a memo circulated across the office. Director Malik Jefferson will be taking a temporary leave for personal matters. No meeting, no discussion. Just like that, he was quietly removed from the leadership board subtly and expertly, the rug pulled from under his feet. There was no doubt now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a test, a society whispering, "Do you have the strength to speak out, or will you stay quiet like the ones before you?" Malik set his glass down. His eyes were no longer those of a broken man. They were the eyes of a man awakened. He began to type. On his personal laptop, he recorded every detail, every phrase he remembered from the police station. He attached evidence dashcam footage, GPS tracking, surveillance video from his condo, proving he had done nothing wrong. And he didn't send it to the media. He sent it to Watch the Watchers, a civil oversight group he had once funded but never thought he'd rely on. At the end of the email, he wrote, "I don't need pity. I need the truth to be looked at face to face." And when he hit send, Malik knew he was no longer the man he was the day before. He had crossed a line, and on the other side of that line was war. The morning after the video went public, the air in Atlanta no longer felt the same. Malik Jefferson stood quietly by the window of his modest apartment in South Downtown, eyes tracing the city streets as they slowly woke up. Everything looked as usual. Cracked sidewalks, creaky traffic lights swaying in the wind. The distant hums on asphalt. But something had shifted, an uneasiness, an alertness, as if the silence now carried weight. As if all the eyes were watching, waiting. Last night? The truth had spread like wildfire. The once denied body cam footage was now plastered across hundreds of news headlines. And what stunned the public most wasn't just what happened, it was realizing that the man humiliated in the video was Malik, the man many had treated as invisible for years. He hadn't slept. Not out of fear, but because the memories had returned the side eyes from colleagues, the times he was cut off in meetings, the reports altered without a trace. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, text messages, interview requests from major networks. Everyone wanted his story. But Malik wasn't chasing fame. What he wanted was real change starting from within the very system he had once trusted. He sat at his old kitchen table and opened his laptop. No social media, no news. Just a private filia collection of hundreds of notes he'd quietly documented over time. Incidents of brutality, names of officers who disappeared from internal logs, victims who were never named. Malik didn't just want justice for himself. He wanted it for all those who had been erased. At the police department, the atmosphere was heavy. Those who once laughed with him now avoided eye contact. Those who secretly despised him now had permission to show it. Malik walked the halls like a stranger in his own house. But he didn't shrink. He knocked on Lieutenant Dawson's office door, a thick file in his hand. "We need to talk, privately." Dawson looked up, hesitant. "Right now?" "Right now." The door closed behind them. No more whispers in the hallway. Malik placed the folder on the desk. "This is everything I've got about what happened to me, and beyond." Dawson flipped through the file quickly. Dates, locations, witnesses, excerpts from internal records, and the names of those who had been protected. "You do realize you're digging into a hornet's nest, right?" Dawson said, his voice low. "I know," Malik replied. "And this time, I'm not afraid of getting stung." Dawson studied him for a long moment. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? This goes deeper than you think." Malik nodded. "I hope it does." That evening, the dominoes began to fall. The mayor's office called for an emergency hearing. The police union remained silent. And most significantly, the prosecutor who had once dismissed Malik's case issued an urgent public statement, pledging full cooperation with a comprehensive investigation. Malik didn't celebrate. He knew victory wasn't in the camera flashes. It was in the quiet meetings, the reopened case files, the persistence that didn't back down. He returned to his small kitchen, reopened his laptop, and kept typing. Not to become a hero, but to become the man who rebuilt justice out of the ashes it left behind. They often say that truth is a serpent. Dig deeper, and you'll find layer after layer of gray scales hiding beneath what once seemed harmless. Naomi Carter never imagined that a slap in the courtroom would ignite a storm this massive. Her office, once a solemn place for courtroom deliberations, had now become the command center of a covert investigation where old case files were unearthed, vague testimonies were re-examined, and names once deemed untouchable were surfacing again, not in the halls of honor, but under the column of suspicion. In the dim glow of her desk lamp, Carter, her trusted aide, placed a thick file in front of Naomi. It had just arrived from the Federal Investigation Bureau. Stamped on the cover, "Incidents involving Officer Donald Ray, 2013 to 2022. Naomi opened it with steady hands, but her heart quickened as the first name appeared. ADA Marcus Holloway, a prosecutor once known for lightning-fast case resolutions. She remembered him well, cold, sharp, and overly cooperative with enforcement agencies. Beneath his name was Judge Michael Serrano, her former mentor when she first joined the judiciary. Once a symbol of upright justice, at least in whispered stories down courthouse halls. But now, according to the report, he had signed off 3 times to suppress evidence in cases tied to Ray. "Number, this can't be," Naomi murmured. She stood up, pacing slowly, her eyes settling on the window where the Detroit skyline faded into dusk. "People I trusted, people I called mentors." Her voice didn't tremble, but it cracked. Carter looked at her and said calmly, "You've always known there were rotting parts in this system. You just never had the light to see the whole shape until now." Naomi nodded. "Then we keep going. We dig deeper." The following days became sleepless marathons. Naomi not only reviewed Ray's record but expanded the scope to include every trial where he was listed as a key witness. What emerged wasn't a scattered series of errors, was a tightly woven web of power: dishonest officers, silent prosecutors, approving judges, and defense attorneys under pressure. One case left Naomi standing still for a long time. Jamal Price, a 17-year-old sentenced to 15 years for drug possession with intent to distribute. The evidence? A single Ziploc bag with no fingerprints. The only officer present? Donald Ray. The ADA? Marcus Holloway. The judge? Michael Serrano. Naomi hadn't recalled the trial clearly. She had only observed it as a clerk. But now, the puzzle pieces aligned. She knew that if she did nothing, boys like Jamal would keep disappearing behind, parachute up by a system that allowed no defense. One evening, as she was drafting a memo for the State Inspector General, Carter entered holding an unmarked envelope. This was hand-delivered. No return address. Naomi opened it. Inside were 3 photos. One showed her and Serrano at a 2015 judicial gala. Another captured Serrano shaking Holloway's hand during a private courthouse meeting. The third was of Jamal Price, eyes wide with fear as he was led out of the courtroom. Attached was a single note. "How many more will it take for you to see?" Naomi sat down, palm pressed to her forehead. This was no longer just an investigation. It was an awakening. No one would save the system, except those who had once risen from within it. The next morning, she picked up the phone and called multiple high-level offices. I need a list. Every single case from 2013 onward that involves Officer Ray, Ada Holloway, and Judge Serrano. I will sign to reopen each one. I don't care how long it takes. Ma'am, the voice on the other end hesitated. If you do this, an entire section of the system may collapse. Naomi answered without pause. Then let it collapse. There are nights when darkness doesn't come from the sky, but from people cloaked in righteousness who live like demons under daylight. After the public hearing, Malik Jefferson thought he might finally breathe a little easier. But he was wrong. Because sometimes, when you speak a truth too big, you're not just challenging a person, you're challenging an entire system that knows how to protect itself by any means necessary. That night, rain drizzled quietly across Atlanta. Malik stood by the window of his apartment, watching streetlights cast shadows across the empty road. He said nothing, but his heart wasn't at ease. The instincts of a former investigator remained sharpened. They screamed. Something was coming. And then, it did. A brown envelope slid through the door slot. No return address, no stamp, just a photograph of his mother, Dolores, walking into church the previous Sunday. Scribbled across the photo in red ink. Some secrets deserve to stay buried. Malik froze. His heart didn't race, it thudded deep. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't fear for himself. He'd faced men with guns in their hands and blood on their sleeves. But this time, they targeted someone he loved. And that was a warning he could ignore. Immediately, Malik secured the locks and called Isaac, a former partner from the city's rapid response team. I need you to watch my mother's house. No questions. Just trust me. Isaac didn't hesitate. The kind of friendship forged in life or death situations doesn't need explanations. But the threats didn't stop there. The next morning, an independent journalist, Kayla Monroe, who had been working with Malik to expose the murky ties between ADA Stanton and Judge Whitmore, was suddenly pulled from her newsroom assignment. She called Malik from a blocked number, her voice tight with panic. They told me, if I don't drop this, I'll never set foot in a newsroom again. Malik clenched the phone. The people behind this were tightening the noose and they didn't care who they had to destroy. That's when Malik understood, more clearly than ever. He wasn't fighting a few bad actors. He was going up against a Weeba network of power players with influence, money, and the ability to make someone like him disappear into a footnote. But Malik wasn't built to bow. His heart had never known silence, especially not when that voice was meant to speak for justice. He called his lawyer. Then, he contacted a whistleblower protection group. He met Kayla in person at a small cafe, off the radar. If you want out, I understand, he said. But if you still believe the truth deserves to be known, I'll protect you. Together. Kayla stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Where do we begin? Malik smiled. But it wasn't relief. It was the grim smile of a man who knows what lies ahead, a fight that's unfair, uncertain, and dangerous. But he wouldn't back down. That night, Malik returned to his modest office, now filled with notes, scanned files, and a web of names connecting the players behind Georgia's corrupted justice system. All pinned together like a sprawling map at its center, the names of those who had once silenced an entire city. Suddenly, the lights went out. His monitor flickered. Malik reached into his drawer and pulled out a small handgun reflex that hadn't dulled. Nothing happened. A minute later, the lights returned. But on the screen, a single message appeared without any program running. You should have stayed retired. Malik exhaled, not out of fear but exhaustion. The threats wouldn't stop him, but they reminded him. The path he chose, standing with the truth, had placed him at a point of no return. He sat down, opened a new document, and wrote the first line. If I disappear after today, know that the truth still exists. He saved the file to 3 drives and sent them to 3 people, a friend in the FBI, a national journalist, and someone he trusted more than anyone, his mother. No one knew what tomorrow would bring, But Malik Jefferson had chosen his side. And when a man puts his faith in justice, even the shadows should tread lightly. When the truth is powerful enough, it doesn't need a stage. But today, Malik Jefferson would give it a name, a face, and a voice that could not be silenced. Atlanta's City Hall had never been so packed for a public forum. Every seat was taken from the front row to the back hallway, and outside, the courthouse square was a sea of people. Signs held high read, "Justice demands voice, no more cover-ups, we stand with Jefferson." These people weren't here just to listen, they came to witness. Malik wasn't wearing his old uniform. He wasn't carrying medals. Today, he was not an officer. He was a citizen, a victim, a survivor, and above, a witness. When the moderator called his name, every eye turned to the front. Malik rose quietly and walked slowly to the podium, as if carrying the weight of everyone who had ever been forced into silence. And in that room no one moved. Not a whisper. Everyone was waiting. He began with a calm, steady voice. "My name is Malik Jefferson. I'm 38 years old, former senior officer with the Atlanta Police Department. And I was humiliated, degraded, and threatened by the very people who wore the same uniform as I did, not because I was wrong, but because I refused to bow." His voice didn't shake. It was as solid as stone. And it made those in power shift in their seats, avoiding his gaze. What happened at Hartsfield, Jackson Airport, wasn't an accident. It was the product of a rotten system where power is mistaken for immunity and conscience is buried under paychecks and manufactured accolades. He pulled out a file envelope. The room held its breath. "These are the internal surveillance recordings I obtained legally. You'll see me being stopped for no reason. You'll hear slurs thrown at me for my skin color, for my presence. And you'll witness the moment I was handcuffed, slapped, and threatened with a weapon, simply because I refused to show an old employee ID to prove I wasn't a criminal." Behind him, an elderly woman dabbed at her eyes. A young man clenched his fists. "I'm not here asking for pity," Malik said, his voice sharpening. "I'm here to tell every person in this room, if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. Not because I'm special, but because I understand exactly how this system chooses its targets." He stared directly at the council members, some of whom had ignored his complaints, dodged media questions about the case. "You know his name," Malik continued. "You've shaken his hand. You dismissed dozens of civilian reports because they had no photos, no power, no clean records. But today, you can't use that excuse anymore." He raised another folder. "This is a list of 21 civil complaints, all tied to that same officer. At least 7 victims were under 18. Every case was dismissed for lack of evidence. Evidence doesn't just disappear unless someone makes it disappear." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. A council member whispered to their attorney. Cameras flashed nonstop. "And this," Malik said, his voice catching fire, "is a transcript of a conversation I recorded where a senior official from the department told me, 'It's better to let this blow over. We'll help you get a job overseas if that's what it takes. Just keep quiet.' Another punch to the truth. But this time the truth didn't fall. It ignited. 'Today, I won't be silent. And I will never be silent again,' he finished with one slow, deliberate sentence. 'Because I have lost my trust, but I have never lost hope. And if you can't protect justice, then at least stop standing in its way.'" As he stepped away from the podium, the first to rise was an elderly woman in a white shirt bearing a photo of her son who had died during a suspicious arrest. Then another stood. And another. The whole room rose, not because Malik was a hero, but because he said what a community had waited decades to hear. The truth does not need permission to exist. Malik Jefferson stood behind the glass doors of the courtroom, quietly watching the waves of people pouring into the Georgia State Courthouse in unstoppable tide. They came with signs, with voices, with the beat of drums, and more importantly, with the belief that today wouldn't be like any other day. Today, justice would no longer be confined to transcripts or closed conference rooms. Today, Justice had a voice. Inside the courtroom, everything was carefully prepared for the public hearing wested, not by officials, but by Malik and his team of attorneys. This wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about making sure the system could no longer ignore a gash that had festered for far too long. No suit, no tie. Malik stepped up to the podium in a plain white shirt, but it was his eyes, his voice, and the calm weight of every word that made the entire room fall silent. "I'm not here to recount an accident," Malik began. "I'm here to expose a methoda way this system has survived. By suppressing, forgetting, and burying anything it doesn't want to see." The room was packed. National media outlets were in attendance. Cameras pointed toward him, but Malik didn't flinch. He continued, revealing one document after unauthorized reports. Edited footage. Redacted transcripts, all reconstructed by an independent investigation team he had personally funded through community donations. Then came attorney Deborah Lang. She didn't raise her voice because every word she spoke struck the conscience like a hammer. "The truth never needs to be screamed," she said. "It only needs to be heard." She pointed to a list, nearly 2 pages long, names of officers, prosecutors, investigators, people linked to cases like Malik's who had never been held accountable. "And today, we name them, not for revenge, but to protect those who come next from being silenced." A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. People stood. Some cried. Malik saw a mother in the back row holding her son. Her tears weren't of pain but of hope. Then came the most crucial moment. A federal representative from the Department of Justice stepped up to the podium. With a firm voice, he declared, "Based on bills submitted by Mr. Malik Jefferson and corroborated by an independent investigation, we are launching a statewide special inquiry into misconduct within the Fulton County criminal justice system." The courtroom erupted. This wasn't just talk anymore. This was action coming from the very institutions that once turned their backs on Malik. Outside, the streets overflowed with people. They weren't there to protest, they were there to witness, to affirm that when one person stands up, an entire community can rise with them. Malik walked out of the courthouse, met with applause and hundreds of raised fists. But he didn't smile in triumph, because for him, this wasn't the finish line. A reporter rushed forward. "Malik, what do you think this will change?" He paused, looking straight into the camera lens. "I don't expect it to change everything in a day. I just need it to be loud enough so no one else has to trade their youth just to be believed." The crowd erupted. "We believe you, Malik. Justice for Malik is justice for all." That night, dozens of news agencies ran the story. The state attorney general appeared on television, promising to form an independent task force to review over 200 misconduct claims from the past decade. And in an unprecedented move, the mayor of Atlanta announced that Malik would be appointed to the Council on Justice System Reform. As for Malik, he returned to his small apartment in West End, sitting quietly on the porch with Deborah and the friends who had stood beside him from the beginning. They didn't toast. They simply shared a few moments of peace after a storm they had sparked themselves. "What were you thinking up there?" Deborah asked. Malik looked up at the city skyline. "I was thinking, if a slap could shake the whole system, then surely standing up could change it." The morning rain tapped gently on the glass roof of the Atlanta courthouse, its rhythm echoing like the opening notes of a solemn anthem. Malik Jefferson walked through the main hall with steady steps, but within him surged a storm. Today was not just another hearing. Today marked a historic reckoning, where the man once humiliated in a courtroom would confront an era built on unchecked authority. Throughout the corridors, journalists and news crews lined up, microphones raised since dawn, cameras rolling since the night before. No one wanted to miss the moment an entrenched system of power might finally begin to crumble because one man had the courage to say, "Number." Malik wore a navy blue suit, clean, sharp, without insignia. He didn't need a robe to represent justice. Today, his eyes and voice would serve as the law. Behind him were 2 silent but essential companions. his private attorney, and a federal investigator overseeing the litigation files. The hearing took place in Courtroom 6, with space for nearly 300 people now packed to capacity. The benches were filled by once silent witnesses, former colleagues, past victims, and young law students whose eyes gleamed with fire, as if this were their first real lecture on justice. The presiding judge, an older black woman with razor-sharp eyes, tapped her gavel lightly. "You may proceed." Malik stood. No script. Every word had been etched into his memory, as vividly as a scar etched onto skin. "I stand here today," he began, voice deep but clear, "not to seek revenge. I stand to do what this system has long failed to do, return truth to those it has stolen from." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. "Not long ago, I was wrongfully arrested by a white officer inside the very courthouse I once served. What followed the destruction of evidence, the blocked reports, and the threats to my family wasn't a series of coincidences. It was a pattern, a system." He turned and accepted a thick folder from his attorney. "I submit to this court a list of 27 cases each, directly or indirectly, involving Officer Edward Klein. In some, evidence was destroyed. In others, witnesses were coerced into silence. And in every single case, the victims were people of color." Gasps spread across the courtroom like a ripple through still water. The prosecution didn't respond immediately. They couldn't. The evidence had already been cross-checked by an independent investigation. This wasn't an accusation. It was a revelation. "I'm not here to create chaos," Malik continued. "I'm here to restore order, the kind of order this court was supposed to protect but has failed to uphold for years." In the back row, a grieving mother wiped her tears. Her son's case, long buried under a ruling of insufficient evidence. A law student's pen shook as he scribbled every word. Former officials, once untouchable, now had no choice but to face the truth head-on. Then the judge nodded, firm and deliberate. "This court will open a special investigation. All 27 cases will be re-examined under the light of this new evidence. The judiciary will cooperate with the Department of Justice to ensure a fair and complete review." The courtroom erupted not in chaos, but in emotion. Some cried, some held their breath, but Malik didn't smile. He knew this was only the beginning. Justice had cracked the door open, but the road ahead would still be long. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but somehow, it no longer felt cold. That afternoon, Atlanta was no longer the city of sirens, muffled news broadcasts, or silent back doors. Along the boulevards leading to downtown, lines of citizens stood on both sides, holding handwritten signs, "We stand with Jefferson. Truth isn't scary, it's freeing." And a bold declaration, "Justice, finally." Malik stepped out of the federal courthouse, where the dark bricks now seemed soaked with memories. He wasn't walking alone. Behind him were the lawyers who once hesitated to stand by him, now silently following. And in the distance, under the golden afternoon sun, stood his mother, Malik Jefferson, holding a bouquet of white roses, her eyes teary but proud. The investigation had ended. The racist officer had been sentenced, 20 years in prison for abuse of power, tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. But for Malik, it wasn't the verdict that moved him. What gripped his heart was that finally the truth had been given space to breathe. Reporters surged forward, asking rapid-fire questions. "Do you feel satisfied? Do you consider this a victory?" Malik paused, looked straight into one of the rolling cameras, and answered, "This isn't my victory. It's the victory of a system that many thought could never change yet. It was forced to listen to the voice of an ordinary person. I never asked anyone to believe me at first. I only hoped they'd have the patience to wait for the truth." Behind him, his younger brother Marcus sat in a wheelchair, gently pushed by a nurse. Marcus was still recovering from the trauma of the case, after years of their family living in silence and shame. But today, his eyes were different, brighter, stronger, and above all, unafraid. A few weeks later, Malik returned to the university, no longer the student wrongly disciplined. He was awarded an honorary degree at the winter graduation, where students rose to their feet and applauded as his name was called. During the ceremony, the chancellor's voice cracked with emotion. We doubted him. We turned away. But he never turned away from the truth. That's what made him a leader. After the ceremony, a skinny young black student approached Malik and whispered, "You made me believe. I don't have to bow my head just to be left alone." Malik placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, his eyes warm. 3 months later, a new nonprofit was launched. The Jefferson Trust, an organization dedicated to providing legal support to victims of false accusations, abuse, or misconduct by those sworn to uphold the law. Malik wasn't just the founder. He became a speaker, an advocate, and a storyteller for pain that had long gone untold. He appeared on television, led student workshops, and answered questions from high schoolers about civil rights and dignity. He never spoke too loudly, never used harsh words, but every sentence made people want to listen and want to act. On a warm spring evening, as the city finally began to sleep after a stretch of noise and storms, Malik sat in a small room overlooking the backyard where he grew up. Marcus was playing chess with their mother. They both laughed. Laughter that rang out as if there had never been tears. Malik opened his laptop and began writing the first line of his debut book. A simple sentence, but the essence of all he had endured. Truth doesn't save us in silence. It saves us when we're brave enough to speak it and strong enough to keep speaking. He paused for a second, then kept typing. And if you've made it this far, might be asking, what made someone like Malik rise up? What made him refuse to give up? The answer isn't found in a verdict. It's found in the resolve not to let silence win. In believing that when you stand tall, even an entire system can be forced to bow. The final lesson from this story isn't about who won or lost. It's this: justice doesn't arrive on its own. It needs to be named. It needs to be awakened by ordinary people who refuse to accept the unacceptable. If you believe in that, if you believe in truth, fairness, and the power of a story well told, then, like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story won't just be told, it'll be felt. When Malik Jefferson looked back at the moment he was publicly humiliated, he didn't see a wound, he saw a turning point. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs someone clear-headed, courageous, and quiet enough to make an entire system bow its head. Malik didn't need to strike back with fist, she answered with truth, with a title they never saw coming, and with the power to force those who abused authority to confront what they tried to hide. His story isn't just about flipping the script, it's a reminder that true strength doesn't lie in the badge someone wears, but in how we use the truth to protect those who don't have a voice. If this story made you think, if it stirred your anger, but also sparked hope, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Stories that are deeper, bolder, and more real than ever. Because sometimes, a video doesn't just tell justice, it becomes part of it.